Hello and welcome, and good day, good evening, good night, good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to this new virtual DDD. Today we have an open discussion about, do we need software architects? So for the people joining us on Zoom, after we did the introduction, it will just be an open discussion, right? And there's no rules at the start. Maybe we'll need to introduce some later on. Just so you know, for the people on Zoom, when you open up your camera and you speak, people can see you on the live stream. So hello, people on the live stream as well. Nice introduction here. So I'm going to share my screen, what we did today, if I can see the share screen. There we go. So let's join. Let me show you the Miro board. Here we go. So everyone should be able to see the Miro board, and everyone could enter the Miro board as well. We'll show that as well on the YouTube chat. So everyone on YouTube, you can also ask questions and enter the discussion. People on Zoom can also just use the chat. So what we did was ask people asynchronously before this meeting is, do software architecture have a bad name, and why? What expectation do we have? Well, you can read yourself, right? And thank you everyone for putting in the asynchronous input. And there's a few things that we saw happening here, which is really nice. And I look at these as polarities, right? So for instance, right, there's this one post-it that says something about create big documents and expect reading them through without walkthrough, right? So on the one hand, there's too much documentation, death by PowerPoint, they call it, I guess. But on the other hand, we are thankful that they care and help to write good documentation. So there you can see there's a tight balance here. And there's more of these polarities that goes into teaching the teams or enabling the teams and not being command and control. But on the other hand, we are thankful that they enforce regular sync points. You see, so there's also this tight balance between, yeah, we expect them to lead and facilitate, which is partly commanding, but they can also take it too far. So I think that's the discussion today, and we're going to open it up and see if people have some thoughts or ideas by watching this board. We can add stickies to it, and actually the goal here is to see it from both sides, right? We asked developers and we had architects to do this, and so when you speak in Zoom, as me, well, I'm an architect. I have a background as a software developer. I still do software development, but most of my time I do software architect. So I consider myself to be in the role of an architect who does code, yes, but more on that side and not mostly on development. So please, when you start and want to add stuff, just say, where do you fit in, right? So with me today from the virtual DDD meetup is Christina. Hello, Christina. And well, I think that is enough for the introduction today. I'm trying to find this Zoom buttons where I can also see stuff, but I don't see. Ah, there it is. And I think that's it. So let's start. Who wants to start joining?
Great intro, Kenny. One organizing question: can you mute this blinking every time if somebody enters?
Ah, sure.
Thank you. So I'm really happy that we got to this day, because I had different thoughts on it on this on Twitter. The first one, just have a discussion, and the first measurement was well, a lot of architects wanted to discuss. No developer wanted to discuss this open, and this was scary, because if we are not able to discuss with each other, then we won't come together. We won't learn and won't appreciate each other. I am a software developer, by the way, doing architecture since a very long time, because architecture is in the software, and the software is from ones and zeros, but doesn't live in nothing. So there is architecture in every decision with what we are making. We decide about the architecture, respecting it or making it or breaking it. So in the second attempt was to create this mirror board and again start on Twitter, and it worked very well, I hope. Much better as the first one. And that's it about me.
Good. So what, Christina, question to you. What sticky was, well, really getting at you on this board? What really standed out? And
I had a few, I found a few rants. Oh, we had a huge rant on VisualDDD site saying that only these problems appears only in dysfunctional companies, seeing each other as the find or the enemy. Yeah, I couldn't name one exactly. I'm really happy that we have a lot of posts on all sides.
I do have something to share maybe on the back of what Christina said about dysfunctional companies. That I think is good to differentiate, good and bad architects. And by that, I don't mean the person, but I mean the people who have the job title. And in some dysfunctional companies, the people who make the decisions about architecture, they might not have any more, they might be out of touch with technology, but they are still the people who make the decisions about what technology needs to be used and how that technology is going to be used.
Yeah. So what's your background, Augusto?
I'm a hands-on architect. So maybe like you.
Nice.
So yeah, I've been doing architecture for maybe 13 years now. And I think that's a big problem, because then that gives software architects a bad name, because then that becomes the ivory tower architect that makes decisions people need to follow, and they don't understand the why. They don't communicate properly why those decisions are. And I think one of the most important things is that the feedback loop is broken. So they don't accept any feedback from the development teams, and they are not open to hear what are the troubles that they experience with that technology. And I think just because I don't want to take more time, I think developer experience is also something that the architect needs to think about. So it's not only about user experience and the internal customers of the company, but it's also developer experience. And if that's bad, then yeah, it's as bad as any other problem that we can have.
Thanks.
Fully agree.
Yeah, so I see some agree. Anyone who sees it differently or wants to add something here? No?
So I just wanted to ask how, so Augusto, you just described yourself as hands-on architect, so I am a developer, and I wanted to know how do I take that hands-on architect as a role, as in what is it hands-on about?
So I would say that, yeah, it's someone who, when there is a problem, so let me give maybe a couple of examples. One is that when there is a new solution needs to be developed, actually does go and tries the technology. So experiences it, tries to see what is the development workflow, what are the difficulties with it, and then obviously tries to improve that, kind of maybe to digest it a bit for the development team, but at the same time, it shouldn't be too much. And I would say that the other aspect is when a team is experiencing a problem, that they go and sit with the team and they code with the team, and that person pairs with the team. to figure out what is the issue. And I think it was in one of the post-it notes. Sorry, I cannot read them properly now, but it's about sharing the knowledge. I think that's a good architect, and this also kind of applies to all the levels of architecture. They are good communicators, and they help teams and individuals to grow up in their craft.
So what would be the reason? So I think I come from a perspective where there's always good intentions, and being an architect myself, that's also my intention. But what would be reasons why this isn't happening in most organizations? Do you have an idea?
I do have, sorry, I'll talk a bit more, but it's going back to the dysfunctional companies. I think, at least for what I've seen, and I've been extremely lucky because I've seen this only in two places, sorry. And it's when people, they want to keep on being the person with power in the company. And obviously, I don't think they do that out of malice, but it's just that they want to assert where they are. And unfortunately, that brings them to a point where, again, they're out of touch of technology. They want to be in that position. And the way to that is to assert their power and not to accept feedback from people around.
Would you say, and this is the Peter principle, right? You're being, I'm not sure if you know what the Peter principle is, but if you have hierarchical companies, the only way up is to become the next role in the company. Peter principle says at some point you're being promoted in the least, I forgot the English word.
Least dangerous position.
No, the least that you're the worst at.
Yeah, you're overqualified. You get where you end up is where you're slightly underqualified.
So a good project manager isn't a good manager of project managers. But what I usually see is people get the role of architects, and then exactly what you're saying, I think, Augusto, is then they're getting out of touch with the code. But there needs to be a feedback loop of being part of the change, right? They need people, architects, or everyone needs to be part of that decision they made. But usually they, because of the roles in that company, they become promoted, and then they only do decision-making works. Is that what you're going through? But there's never the feedback loop back where they say, well, now I go back to developer, because that's usually not possible because they're already promoted to an architect. And then it's sort of like a demotion, right? They're getting demoted into developer.
It's not a loop.
Yeah.
Well,
It's not a loop. It's an arrow. You can zoom in on the tweet from Adrian about Netflix. I think it summarizes it quite nice.
Is that the cat?
No, yeah, but
this reminded me of what Augusto's saying, right? This isn't a cat; it's actually a CTO holding onto an outdated opinion about a technology they use. Yeah, I think that's one of the main problems. Is architects are usually in a higher role position, but they should actually be on the same level, and there should be a loop there.
Welcome to the session. So this is why we are here. This is why this session exists. There is no such thing like higher, because
no, but that's usually how it's perceived.
Yeah, sure.
I think Christopher wanted to say something.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, because I'm the cat. So
You don't look like the cat.
So I am a CTO, but I think the way Augusto said he's a hands-on architect, I'm a hands-on CTO. So I actually also dive in and code with developers, and I see a ton of benefit there. But something that strikes me about the conversation is that we're talking very much certainly about the real experience of what is often the case in companies with architecture roles, that they're seen as promotions, that they're seen as decision makers, that they're seen as kind of out of touch. And I think one of the key ways to get around a lot of these problems is really to think differently about what the role of an architect is, right? And I make it very clear, for example, I have a team of architects and I make it very clear to them that they are not decision makers. They're influencers, they are advisors, but they're not decision makers. And that already changes a lot.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of it is about kind of setting expectations about what does it even mean to be an architect? And some of what I think we get into a bit with the higher and lower thing is that I think architects should primarily be focusing on the higher level of abstractions of what's going on in the system. And the developers are at the lower level. And obviously there are clearly interactions between these two, and they cause difficulties one way or the other. And that's why it's really important for the architects, as you say, to get in and feel the pain of the developers, and to also share the knowledge of the developers so that the developers can understand that connection between what they're doing and that higher level of abstraction. Yep. So anyway, I do think that it is possible to combat these harmful interactions, but a lot of it has to do with expectation setting about what it means to be an architect.
So Christopher, can I ask you a question on that, right? Usually I see a lot of people, so you're saying I'm telling my architects to be facilitators. They're not taking the decision. So did they have a lot of problems making or letting the teams make the decision? Did you see that happening?
I would say yes, in the sense that my experience is that good developers also tend to have strong opinions. And it is difficult for any person with a very strong opinion to let somebody else make a decision that doesn't correspond to their opinion. So yes, there are challenges there, for sure. But I think that again, as long as that is like clearly set as an expectation, something they can work toward.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and what I usually see is also the other friction then, right? So having collaborative decision takes a bit longer, and sometimes an architect would be put under pressure of moving forward, and then you have this friction between decision taking longer by the team because, well, you need to align the team, right? And you need to find out all the knowledge, but still the architecture is pressured into making the decision. So then they turn, what I usually see, turn to command and control, right? Okay, then I'll do it, and at least we can move on, right? So
yeah, you have to have a patient cat.
Yeah.
Although this is on YouTube and it's going to be recorded. We played with this at the client where Seema is and where I've just left. Because you're exactly right, right? If you move from one person making the decision to potentially everyone making a decision, you open yourself up to paralysis, right? While everyone agrees on a decision. So we went a step further instead of taking a step back. So we implemented a mechanism whereby anyone can make any decision as long as they speak to everyone who's impacted and everyone who has expertise. So then that gives the architects a means to share conversations, share thoughts, point people at other people, all this kind of stuff. And instead of making an architect responsible for the outcome, we used ADRs to document them. And then whichever team made the decision, we're beholden to it, right? And it's very interesting to see, previously you could get people making ad hoc decisions. Suddenly when they're given the power, but also the responsibility, it's you get some crazy decisions to begin with, but then people very rapidly learn. So we got quite good at making shorter term decisions for littler things or bigger things, so we could revisit them and stuff. But that was amazing. That then architecture became a task as opposed to a specific job title.
Yeah.
So that was
we're doing exactly the same now, where the change management is like, if you want something to change, create an ADR, propose it. I'm the architect, call me and I will facilitate it, but I'm not making the decision.
Yep.
So that works. What were the pros and cons there? Did you have any cons to that? Because that's a whole different way, right?
Because
so
it's not enough. It's not
Yes.
Yeah, Seema can talk about this because so there's a blog post coming from the client when he gets when he publishes it about, and it's called The Roller Coaster of Autonomy. But Seema can talk about this a little bit, right? So
Yeah,
don't name the client, Seema.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, but as Christopher said, it is so I'm a developer and we can be very strong. We are very opinionated people, and architecture really is about collaborating with different teams. So we were actually 5-6 teams, and for me the difficulty was to so the rules that Andrew set out were that you have to let everybody make their own decision, and the difficulty was not able to actually say that, you know, what you're doing is wrong, that's not how you should go ahead with, right? So you have to hear them, you have to listen to them, you can try to convince them, but that's it, right? That's where it ends, and then they create the ADR, and that was a very interesting thing. So it doesn't go in a loop forever. So a team has an autonomy to decide and go ahead with the decision they make unless they are convinced by other people. But that was also a difficult bit for me personally to say, okay, to let it go.
Yeah.
So I think there's another connection here, which is, interestingly enough, it's about DevOps culture, really, right? Which is the you have, if you're going to be given the ability to make those decisions, you also have to live with the consequences, right? And so you have to be in a position to feel and experience what happens as a consequence of those decisions. And that really is very much a DevOps culture.
Yeah, 100%.
And this is what is sorry, Ken, this is what I wanted to say. What is missing? The skin in the game.
Yeah.
With a feedback loop, with the ability to enable and to empower people and step back and accept errors. It's just like raising a child. So you have to let go. But with the skin in the game on both sides, or on all sides, the game becomes more leveled and it's not higher and deeper, because every person working in a company has to do his job or her job at best. The CTO cannot do anything without the developers and the other way around. So skin in the game is the most important part, and the feedback loop.
I can understand. And on the other hand, do people want to take the accountability? Because
yeah,
it's
that's
always
stage one. Stage one of the roller coaster of accountability is no one believes that you've just told them they are completely empowered, so nothing happens. Stage two is they all believe, and then you get chaos because everyone's making decisions 15 every minute. And then stage 3 is when it calms down and it gets back to being normal.
And on the other hand, I like not being accountable and just being told what to do. That's also a guilty pleasure, I can say, right? Someone just makes the decision for me and I just do it. What's wrong with that?
Yep. And that's at least 60% of people, Seema, right?
And what would be wrong with that, right? So
depends on the company culture. Do you want this? Do you want to build to have a company where you decide everything? You cannot have, you are the one person, bus factor 100, and you are the most important one, and you have all the power and all the accountability. Do you want this? Then hire these people. And if you don't, then let them go.
Yeah.
Just tell the rules and say, okay, this is all.
It's also on to the person itself to let go, right? We're all autonomous persons, so. But yeah, that's I argue what Avram did, and Avram said, well, Avram Pupko, he said, right, I can believe in a capitalist model where they're shareholders, it's their money, so it's their decision. Mm-hmm. Take it or go on one hand. I can argue for that. I don't want to work in that kind of culture, just so you know. But yeah, I can argue for that as well. So I think a lot of this came out of that type of culture, I can imagine.
I think it actually promotes collaboration more. I have also I do not know, and I may be wrong, but it is architecture, right? So no decision is really the right decision. It's not that this is the right way. You can go this way or that way. You are just choosing the pros and cons, right? So you will face one thing or the other. And when you are actually talking about it together, it may not be the decision that you want to go ahead with, but it's not too big a deal, because you're just saying that, okay, I'm saying this is not too big a deal. Sometimes it may be, but sometimes, or most of the times, it's just not too big a deal, and we can actually decide. And when lots of people are thinking together, it is also so you may actually propose something, but then you find out from other people what, so it actually has more thought processes, right? So you actually think about it more. So that's useful. So you may even change your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's a nice comment from Anton from the chat, right? So, and I like this perception as well, or perspective as well. This is similar for board members as well, sometimes, where architects as well, right? I've witnessed this myself with architects while being a developer, right? There's an architect, they are there for 1 year, set a strategy, leave, another architect comes in, different strategy. And this is, a lot of teams are constrained by tech choices made previously. It's not so common that teams have true autonomy, also because engineers will not stay long enough to feel consequences of the decision. So how would we deal with that, right? So yeah, and I recently saw a right meme for that, right? Let me find it. But yeah, right, writes unmaintainable code, leaves company. That one.
Yeah, the feedback loop is again not existent. I mean, you have to be able to give feedback to writing bad code should be stopped at the first review or second. So it's nothing which must go on forever. And the same regarding opinion and mindset, and losing touch with technology. It's not only about technology, but decisions like changing technology from let's change everything from React to Vue. Do you think about the consequences? Do you think about are there enough people to hire? It's not only technology, it's much bigger. It's a strategic question. And discussing these decisions and putting them in a document can lead to a situation that everybody can leave. But this is an ideal situation. Somebody can come and can leave without letting everything burn down after that. So, or burn up, or burn. It belongs to the culture and to this developer experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that sort of at the level of the small. That is, like, it is true that any person should be able to come and go and things should be able to continue to run smoothly. But if you have a culture of high churn, high turnover, and nobody stays for long, this is a bad sign.
Terrible.
And
terrible sign.
And so so you know what Anton is saying about the fact that not many developers stick around long enough to experience the consequences of their decision, that is definitely a bad sign. And it's a real indication of needing to build the right kind of culture. And I think very often that kind of culture includes making sure that people are A, empowered, B, given the opportunity to make mistakes and learn from their mistakes without having, without having terrible consequences, and then building a culture of really collaborating together toward a purpose, right? And I think that goes a long way toward building the types of relationships that will be positive instead of confrontational, like we see in some of the problems with this.
Hi guys, let me maybe clarify what I meant by that statement. So, because from my experience, I've seen that people sometimes they see some new technology and they're very excited, they're very keen to use it, and they just use it. Like, I've seen people replacing, I don't know, SQL with MongoDB and then implementing relational model in MongoDB, or using some open source library and so on. And I want to comment, Chris, on this thing that you mentioned that it's bad sign. But I think if you look at the industry, average time that engineer spends in one company, something like 2 or 3 years. And I think it's okay to expect that an engineer will leave your company in 2 or 3 years, because this is industry average. And that's why I think people who, for example, you use Amazon Cloud and then suddenly someone says, I want to use Google because they have cool thing called whatever, full bar. And then in 3 years he leaves and you need to deal with Google. So this is what I meant.
But would you accept such a sentence as an argument? It's not an argument. Google is cool. Because
I mean, what I'm trying to say, that there are some very passionate people and they are like, you know, experienced, and you hire a new senior engineer, bring some new technologies, and he brings his experience, and then in 3 years he leaves. And if you don't have someone who is supervising that, like someone like CTO, or like I work in Sweden right now, and it's very uncommon to have architects. We don't have architects, at least in like small and medium companies, but we have tech leads, for example. And tech lead is someone who's supposed to kind of supervise what people are doing, so they don't just choose random cool open source library because he read about it yesterday in some cool blog post.
Yeah. So that reminds me, right, about teams that have no hierarchy or flat organization. The problem usually there is also power dynamics, like ranking. If you not make explicit the decision-making process, then this can be a problem. But I think that also has to do with recruitment, right? If I recruit someone, I wouldn't look at technical capabilities, but more on how, what for you is the most important
values.
Value. And for me, I hear a lot of, well, not a lot. I hear some senior developers call themselves seniors and say that they don't need any coaching or mentoring. So for me, that, well, by default doesn't make you a senior anymore. And I usually, there's something wrong with the recruitment process there. So my friend João is interim CTO, and well, he's now experiment with including people in the recruitment process, right? So the team itself needs to be responsible also for getting these new people in so they can experience. And if they would find this during the recruitment process, well, you're my new tech lead, or even, well, in my company, I get to be in the participation of a new manager, right? Then hopefully, and we all make mistakes, then we can, well, get these things out, hopefully.
It belongs to the part skin in the game. I mean, why should somebody at HR care about my team colleague more than hired and checked? It is I want to work with her every day, and I want to make a great team, and I know how what the team is lacking. So of course, should development or the teams should be involved.
The other thing about skin in the game, I think it's like very post-accelerate, but the kind of thing that Anton talks about is easier. The kind of mindset is easier if you're not shipping, you know, you're just building a big product and in a year and a half you're going to release. If you've got to release, you know, if you might release in 3 days time, or maybe later today, or maybe, you know, in a month, where most people are, that then changes the dynamic, right? And you can flush out people quite quickly who talk a good game, but don't.
Yeah, that's kind of where I went as well, is you know, two years, that should be plenty of time to feel the consequences of the decisions that you make, right? So I also noticed that Augusto posted in the chat that average turnover is more like just above 1 year, right? And I would say like 2 to 3 years, I can live with 2 to 3 years potentially. If it's really just above 1 year and your company is at that kind of average, I do think that's a bad sign. Even if it is the industry typical or average, that doesn't make it a good thing, right? And not something that I want to live with, right? I don't want that. I want something much better.
Yeah. On the hiring thing, like, it's not a very, I was surprised when I read it, but I've met some people from Netflix, and everyone in the Bay Area, they all move apart, you know, moving once a year in the Bay Area is kind of standard, right? The people I know at Netflix have been there for ages, which is a big deal, but in the Bay Area, that's a really big deal. And then if you read some of the books by their old head of people or whatever, chief people officer, how they treat people and talent and make people autonomous and kind of look after them when they want to stay and pay them to leave if it's kind of doesn't work out for them. That's really interesting. They make it easy to hire the right people. They make it easy to make you feel you're being paid and recognized for what you do because they ship, right? But then if the phase of the company changes from like, I don't know, startup running really fast, just get it out the door, to slightly more boring, but building Chaos Monkey and stuff, then they let you go, right? So, and that's really interesting. And so people I know have been there for a long time.
This is developer experience.
Yeah.
It works very well in a very quickly growing startup like Netflix, because you can give shares to people. They will get more and more value over time. You can afford paying insane salaries. But for us, I assume most of the people here on this forum, we are from Europe. And in Europe, it's more uncommon to have these crazy growing startups and big stockpiles and $300,000 salaries. And so I don't think it's fair to compare us and Netflix or even Bay Area.
I think, but it's interesting because lots of them are famous Netflix engineers and could leave to go to another company. I know a lot of them have been, other companies have tried to entice, because they're, they all do talks and stuff. It's interesting that they stay. So they've got good stock options, right? But they could have gone to Uber or to Facebook and stuff, and they haven't, which is quite interesting. Because I think at some point the salary and the I think fundamentally at some point being paid a certain amount stops making a difference, and being able to ship your code and see people use it makes an equal amount of difference.
There's several people saying this, and I think there's a lot of research. At some point, there's a turnover that salary doesn't.
Yeah, it's obviously quite. You know what I mean? It's obviously not a little amount of money, but at some point, shipping code. I've worked in too many companies where we didn't ship code, and it's just you don't feel any value from what you've done, right? So.
Exactly. Would be, Anton, would this be, you said before that you would see some supervisors and tech leads should supervise. Is this something which is important for you, or would it be something more important to be able to ship and see how the customers are happy or not, or catching some bugs before they are released, or rewards like this? Wouldn't be something more important than the money?
I mean, many things are important, and different things are important for different people, right? Because I'm experienced developer. I have like 15 years of experience. I've worked in a number of companies. I'm tech lead right now. I'm shipping code to production like virtually every day. I'm making decisions. I participate in decision making, and I understand what you mean. But I was just trying to say that still there are some companies I've seen in the past that, for example, someone, this buzz factor, some smart engineers comes to the company and build some solution using some cool technology. And then suddenly this guy leaves the company and no one knows about the technology. And this is surprisingly, this is so common in or maybe I'm so unlucky, I don't know.
No, it is common. You're right, Anton. You see it quite a lot, right?
So let's, we've been talking about the good and the bad aspects of a software architect. So maybe let's dive into one of these things. So I hear, for instance, Christopher, you said the let's call this the what is a good character? I cannot write characteristic of an architect.
Try.
And what is a bad one? So
I put already some post-its here. Now I moved them.
Yeah. So should we go into that? So what are characteristics and what are bad?
Okay, then I switch them.
Is that something we want to dive into? Let's make that more visible, right? So let's dive in. So I hear Christopher said, right, architects are not making decisions. And I hear Seema, you're setting letting go of the ownership, something like that, right? They're able to letting go of the decision. So
And
trust,
collaborate more. I'll put it.
facilitate collaboration, you said, or?
Oh no, just collaboration. Just have multiple teams talk about it, architecture.
Between teams. Okay, so when we have developer experiences, essential architects or influences. I have another one here. So I see this similar usually to a manager and a developer, or a manager and the people in the team. I heard a colleague of mine in his, a friend of mine in his end of the year talk. He says, okay, why do I need to stay at this company? So he totally turned it around, right? And that's how I see this relationship maybe as well. And usually we're not doing it. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? So they're there to serve the teams instead of the other way around.
Servant leader is called.
Yeah.
Let's put it as
Thanks
servant
for changing,
leader.
Christopher. So servant leadership. So what are some dark patterns here? Feedback loop is broken. So a question here, this also resolves to managers. And maybe someone can tell a story on that. Should the team be able to give feedback on the architects on their performance end of the year? If there is
not end of the year, but every second week or something.
Sure.
So
Part of that thing. So not being developer is not in the feedback loop of HR performance.
Yeah.
This is what I usually find weird with managers as well, that they get their performance review and nobody asks the team, right? Nobody asks the teams, okay, how did your manager actually do this year for you? And they're not asking, like, okay, that's for me is already a sign I don't want to work at that company. But
yeah,
but you already take it for given that architects and developers are two different persons.
I heard many times about like PowerPoint architect. There is some phrase at least that I heard many times, and that probably is anti-pattern, which means the architect who is not writing any code. And I think you discussed it as well. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I did not join from the very beginning.
We discussed it a little bit. I'm totally sure that until a quite size of a company, I wouldn't have two different roles. Of course, from one huge companies or more than 100 teams or something, it is very hard to handle. But the normal middle-sized company and small companies, wouldn't see a different role. Then you have a lot of you don't have a lot of problems after that. You don't have this silo thinking. You don't have this hierarchy or one person leaves and everything. It's a big issue that one person leaves. You have teams taking over responsibility, teams having the skin in the game, teams taking decisions, and teams collaborating because they have to.
Is it about the size of the company, or is it about the characteristics of the system or systems?
I probably should clarify what I meant. Probably applies only to small and medium companies, because this is where I mostly work. Because in huge companies, of course, you can have many layers of architects. You can have chief architect, you can have system architect, solution architect, and some of them, they never touch code probably.
Sorry guys for jumping in between, but I think rather than discussing about, and going back to the subject that we have, do we need software architect? Probably we can learn from each other in what context we need it. Because Christopher mentioned an interesting thing that he is having a software architect group. So I'm more keen to know why you came up with this decision. Because just to give you a background about me, I have worked in almost all the situations that you're talking about, where we have architect group working as in ivory tower. I literally used to hate them. Then I moved to a company where we were all making decision on our own. Then I've seen the dark side of that also. Right? Now I'm in a company where we are thinking about having an architecture group. Right? So I'm more keen to know that what has led Christopher you to make a decision, such a decision, and what are even the things that your architecture groups actually, or responsibilities that they are having now, and how they are helping your development teams on day-to-day basis.
Well, some of this actually goes back to a couple of topics that have been touched on a little in the conversation. One of them has to do with Anton's comment about what we inherit when we come to a company, right? So I came to a company that had a culture of very top-down decision-making, where there was a chief architect who was the only deployer, who was the gatekeeper, who reviewed all the code and so forth. And I really wanted to change the culture to be much more autonomous and drive the decision-making into the teams. But as we say, that's not something that changes overnight. It's not like you just go to the teams and say, okay, you make all the decisions now, and they go, yay. This takes some time to develop. And so it was important for the teams to be able to look to somebody for guidance, and someone who could help them to develop that understanding of the bigger picture, the understanding of why certain decisions have been made and what might be the pros and cons and so forth. And over time, we've developed that into, I think, quite an effective small group of influencer architects. And it's working out quite well for us. And we're seeing now that the teams are developing that expertise. Now, what my architects tend to do is that they tend to then go and explore other areas that a developer who is responsible for delivering features may not have time to go explore, and then come and present them to the team. So DDD is a great example of this, where my architects can go and help then to educate the teams and say, let's work through some of these things together. Let's talk about what is a bounded context. Let's look at your specific thing that you are trying to build right now, and let's talk through it together, and let's talk through the pros and cons. So this is, I think, working out quite nicely for us, but it's certainly not an architect who has to like approve or make all of the decisions for the development teams.
Makes sense. Then, and just a follow-up question on the same thing. So how does it like work in your day-to-day stuff? And let's say a team is supposed to implement a new feature or something like that, and how do you make sure that there is a architect involvement is required for this particular piece? How does the collaboration happens between the architect group and the teams?
So we've done it in a few ways. Sometimes we do it by having the architect kind of embed with the team and build with them. Sometimes we do it by having the team like have a series of design meetings where the architects come and the team presents their design, and then we talk through the pros and cons. Those are I would say the two primary ways that we do that. And then we periodically also have like cross team information sharing sessions where the teams can bring topics and we can find commonalities and maybe say, hey, maybe this is something that next week or next month we should like talk about. And
does that become like blocker for, or a bus factor kind of a thing, like, oh, we cannot, because we have to make a decision on it and we are dependent on them, now we cannot move forward, and it becomes a hindrance for the team velocity?
So I would say in our case, this mostly depends on the comfort level of the team itself in making decisions. Like we do not tell the team that they cannot move ahead without having the architectural input. We encourage them to do so. And mostly it's the team who says, if we think we probably want to get another opinion on this.
Okay. So it's more of a pull-based approach in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
That's how you know it's working, right? Because if you can see it, people pulling and sharing information as opposed to being told to, that's when you know that it's working.
Yeah, sounds good.
So another one here from Fred, right? In building, there would never be something like a construction in building, there would never be something like a construction architect. You have an architects and engineering disciplines. Why is this not so for IT? Question mark. Before I react, yeah, go ahead, Simon.
So I do think that there is architecture in the small and architecture in the big. And I know small and big are relative. But if it's, and I think Christopher also touched on this, where he says, does it depend on the scale of the software that you're building? I think if it is a small application, it can really be the developers of a team that can decide how we want to go with this architecting that application. As soon as that application has to fit in within other subsystems and it has to coexist with other subsystems, and if those are huge number, like 50 microservices, now you have to figure out some cross-cutting concerns that will affect all the systems. And that is where I think you need a different role, at least. Yeah. So answer to this for me is that in IT, it may be small, so may not be needed.
I think there is another thing that this is a metaphor that, yeah, as someone mentioned, is taken from buildings, but as a metaphor, maybe it's not the best one, because in buildings you have developers. The developers are going and putting the bricks one on top of each other. That in our case is just a tool that we use, like Gradle if you're in Java, Make if you're doing C. So those metaphors, yeah, they need to be taken with a bucket of salt. I wouldn't say a pinch of salt, because yeah, they don't reflect properly.
Can I say something? So I posted this, and if you construct a big building, then you have electrical engineers, you have construction engineers, you have people who are doing all kinds of engineering jobs, and the architect has a special role, is basically guarding the overall concepts and ideas. But an architect is probably not someone who can do calculations on a concrete construction, or let's say and I see. So I don't think you should compare software engineers with bricklayers. No, it's about a decision process. Indeed, doing the construction like manufacturing, that should be automated. It's about overall decisions at different levels, and you have decisions in software, and you have decision in, let's say, system of systems, or the overall concept of a system. And so I think an architectural is most of all about communication. So if there are different people involved, understanding what each of the people involved is doing, and does it align with the original concept, or so it's guarding that everybody works towards a common goal, and I think the architect is the keeper of that goal, and so it can be a role, of course. It can be in a small company with a small team. It can be a senior engineer that takes that role, of course. It's not per se a function, and it certainly is not hierarchical per se as well. So I would say if the architect and has a specific goal in mind, and he sees a conflict, I think he should have the last word if there is a conflict in a team, or but there's also from a practical side to let's say at some point enforce a progress.
Yeah, so you're saying if they see a conflict in the team, they should. I'm not sure what you said, Frank.
So if there is a discussion which maybe an architect thinks will deviate from the goal, so there was discussion about using that new and fancy technology that was invented 2 days ago, and which everybody, software engineers, sort of tend to like, which can be really conflicting with establishing an outcome and maybe with the context you're working in. So indeed, you can start using it, but after a year, is there still somebody around who understands it, and or whatever reason? So there can be contextual reasons for not to want that, and then somebody needs to make the decision to, okay, no, let's not do this, because it will be fine now for the coming sprints, but in a year from time it will gives us a heartache.
Yeah, there is by the way, very good term for it. Local optimization should not contradict with global optimization. So
and I also see the so talking about scale. If you talking about a building and you have often also architects at, let's say, a city level, or I don't know what's the proper word for that, or
city planner.
City planner, exactly, and so I think an architect can also be making sure that the context where a team is living in is understanding that context, and not having every engineer, developer have to be aware what's happening around it. That's indeed. So an engineer should not have the time for that. He should focus on the job at hand, and so that could be also a role of an architect, is making sure that the context of the team is understood and also aligned with the goals of the company.
That's cognitive load. Actually, that's a super important point, right? Because if I'm in a smaller team with maybe a smaller scope, but I know it in more detail, and then maybe I'm an architect with a broader view but less detail, because at some point human beings reach their cognitive load limit, right?
Yeah.
And making sure that everyone doing all of the roles can coexist in an environment where they know enough to do their job. That's hard.
So one thing you said that popped my mind, and what Fred, what for me is most interesting, and what I usually don't see happening quite well, is I believe architects should also be, and managers as well, able to manage conflicts on a deeper level than the rational. So also on an emotional level. So if there's no decision being able to make, or the decision is in a different way than you expected, then what hasn't been said that has to be said? So usually there's this patterns of cycling through decisions, right? We come back in decision making again and again. And this is usually that there's something on a deeper level that hasn't been discussed yet. It's usually the emotional level. For me, in IT as a whole, and I also came from that side, and I'm trying to work myself on this part a lot better now, is how can we communicate also on a more emotional level? So for instance, there was a decision made in one of the companies I was, and just because that decision was made doesn't mean people cannot talk about that. It's a right. There was a decision being made that makes sure for the next 3 months, we're not being a full team because we need to migrate certain bits of the architecture as a team. And so that means we're not cross-functional, and that's not fun. We know it's the correct goal, but on an emotional level, it doesn't feel right. And that needs to be there as well. And usually we are forgetting about, yes, there is a decision being made, but that also means that there's also on an emotional level a pain that needs to be expressed. And usually I think managing that conflict is something a architect needs to be able to do, rational and emotional. Not sure if what other people think of that or see it differently.
This is the part of your servant leader. It's not only servant, but it's also a leader. So at the final point, if nobody can decide, they should take the decision, because this is why they are there. This is why they have all the experience. And not to say, oh no, you are autonomous now, I don't take any decisions. This is just preparing my finger pointing time. So no, it's not a servant leader this way. Of course, they should teach and coach and help, but take decisions even if they are hard or with big consequences. But that's it. Life is not kindergarten. So.
Yeah, and I think it's a tough one because, right? Sometimes the team cannot make the decision. I gave autonomy once to a team, and then they didn't want to take the decision because it was too big for them to make the decision. Right? They felt insecure about the decision.
Sure, because you cannot give autonomy. You can allow to be taken.
Yeah, I allowed it. And
yeah, but it's not throwing over the fence. It won't work this way because there is also more sentence about maturity and situations and pressure, and we didn't talk about management and stakeholders and whatever other complexities here. So it's in a normal world for me, everybody should discuss with each other and discuss about the consequences. And I take decisions every day, but I always ask my team, and they can say, hey, I don't get it, but I don't need to get it. I trust you, but I am in the loop. It takes me 10 minutes to give them the loop, and they are in the loop and can learn and maybe take over if I'm on holidays. This is what motivates me to be able to go to holidays and know that the team is not stopped and blocked.
Trust is the key word as well, right? This is the thing. Sometimes they'll just trust you because they know that you're doing all the right things and stuff, or that they could tell you to stop, Christina, if they didn't agree, right? But they're maybe happier because they can go off and write code and they know you're feeling all these things. But if they don't know that they could tell you to stop because they think you've gone rogue, then that's bad, right? So.
Then it's bad. I ask to argue with me or to challenge it because I need these challenges. Nobody knows everything. Most of us doesn't. So need this challenging and need to be heard, not only to be listened to.
Anton's dead right. Seema and I are contractually obliged as thought workers to mention that pairing and mobbing is very good, but it is super good for this stuff, right? Because then you see everyone's skills, everyone gets eyes on the same thing. It's a more open forum around about something concrete like code or a problem, as opposed to just a general team dynamic.
Yeah. So what I'm just connecting dots here, but what Christopher said a while back about having a pull-based model, I don't know if it would work for your situation, Kenny, but if the teams have perceived autonomy, and if they are stuck and not able to make a decision, then they can pull on the architects. Do you think that's a model that potentially can work?
Yeah, well, I usually first make the collaboration on the decision part, and if I see them struggle, I will just tell them, and I try to relate. So I try to relate. I can imagine this. So what do you need? And here are some options. We can postpone it. Can we postpone this? That's usually my first question. Like, can we do some experiments to make you more?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Experiment. Can we postpone the decision? Is this a decision reversible? I know. I'm not sure who it was, but someone said, I forgot the name. Ron Jeremy, I think. While pairing, right? If you see the other person making a decision that you know in the long run is going to be painful, but it is a decision that's easily reversible, I'll just let them do it and experiment and feel the pain. Because sometimes
reversibility of decisions is a big deal. People don't think about it enough.
You got to join Ruth Malan's workshop, right? She has this awesome handbook, I would call it, for architects, where it says, right, almost all decisions are able to be postponed, and you can create smaller decisions from them and make experiments. So there was this decision between two, and I said, can you use it at the same time? And they said, yes. Well, in 2 weeks, we'll just use them together for this user story. We take a bit more pain now, and we'll see in 2 weeks again. And, okay, fine. So we don't need the decision now. And I didn't come up with that before. I didn't even know. But during that conversation myself, I came up with that. And at the right time, I took at least a decision that we could move forward with while not making the decision, right?
Yep. And this is what Fred said, to move forward.
Yeah, to move forward. Yeah. Exactly what Fred said.
Yeah, that's the like we spike out loads of our decisions. Loads of our decisions get spiked first. So someone actually goes and does it. They don't just read a website and download and write "Hello World." Because we look, you discover loads of stuff. Oh, we do that, but then we build it. Because otherwise you're like, well, it did everything it said on the marketing slide, but it didn't do the 7 other things we needed to do, which we only discovered when we tried to build it. Right?
Yeah, it's always this life of a developer. Read the small caps.
Sorry, go Seema.
It seems to me that architects are almost like superhumans, the way we are making them out to be. I mean, I'm a developer, but it does seem that there's a lot of communication and emotional intelligence that we expect from the architects.
And why not?
I think it's a projection, right? I think a architect should be a role, and I'm into role theory and deep democracy. And a role is everything, right? From being a mother, being a father, being a leader, being yes, exactly. Gem cultures. Perfect.
Every time Kenny says
and role theory is everyone has it, but usually if we make the function architect, then we also project it all on an architect.
Yeah.
And that's like the system trap, right? Shifting the burden to the intervener. And there's where the trap is. And I think, Andrew, you said it before, is that you want to be able to make them make the decision. But if there's already the way you come into a company, oh, we just hired the architect. I'm like, uh-oh, big trap projection going on there. So the first thing you need to do is try to spread that role of being an architect towards the team so that everyone can carry that part.
It's always a bad smell when they hire an architect and he comes in and feels and it is a he, right? It's almost inevitably a he. And they'll feel the need to make 7 big decisions really early on to justify their value. Yeah. Whereas I'll spend as much time as possible ignoring all possibilities to make decisions and learning about previous decisions, because that tells you what you need to know, right? So yeah sorry, Kenny.
No, exactly that.
You say we get to the post-it white middle-aged man.
But this is a big problem. I actively have to, people think I'm going to tell them what to do. And even when I haven't told them what to do, people still sometimes act like I've told them what to do. And it's really terrifying. Like the thing that keeps me awake at night more than anything is people think I'm cleverer than I am, because I'm not, and that I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. And so, but, you know, but if I actively from day one, I'm trying to learn from people, raise people up. Like the reason I keep branching jam cultures is and not just being, you know, if you step out of the way, the two other middle-aged white men in the team will step up typically, right? And they'll start filling in the space you've made. So you don't just need to clear the space, you need to clear the space and then hold the space for all of the people in the team. Maybe the junior dev, right, that just joined, who's done like a, you know, they've been on a 16-week, you know, kind of JavaScript hothouse thing, right? But they're, you know, so they're very new, but they're baked into TDD and pairing, like they can't conceive of writing code without it. I want to know what they think, right? I want to know what the person who's written, you know, ancient, you know, COBOL and doesn't talk about anything anymore. I want to know what they think. All of those different people. I want to know what the PO, the UX person thinks. That's what you want to do, because that's how you get the good conversations and the right decisions.
Sure. And then this sentence it's not valid anymore about the problem are not architects who are middle-aged, cis and white men, but who are not talking, who are gatekeeping. The gatekeeping is a much bigger problem than. So I don't know. I never were a white man. I'm a white woman. It's enough. but I don't know if we can put everything on this card.
No, I think you're right. Gatekeeping is the big thing, right? Because people,
why are they gatekeeping?
Because sometimes out of fear, I think. Fear. Because they're like, I've just been promoted. This feels like a terribly large responsibility, so I should make it look like I'm worth the pay rise. Because you typically, in the UK, you get a pay rise and you become an architect. And then you're scared because suddenly, like you said, with the Peter principle, you might have been a good developer. I sidestepped being a good developer and went straight to being an architect. So, but it's terrifying.
And then you come to
the covers are terrified, but they're doing it because they think that they're supposed to do it.
And then you come to information hiding and the other dysfunctional stuff. And the same what Kenny said, if you are starting as, the new architect is coming, you cannot resolve this problem anymore because you have a new title, you surely have a different pay, so you can do everything what you want. You put yourself in a different position. This is why I never in my life had a title more than software engineer, because I'm still a coding architect, and this is what you get. You cannot not hire the architect, but not on the paper and never in front of a team. I don't know if it's the right way to go. I don't know if my way. It's surely not so good paid way to go, but it makes me much happier because I don't have this burden to prove that I worth the title or something.
Yeah, because it should be, the success of the team should be, or your success as an architect should be the success of the team, because if it isn't delivered,
then everybody has failed. And this is what Accelerate is. Either we win together or we fail together. And then you don't have place for hierarchies and being more important or less important. This is skin in the game.
Einar's comment is good.
Yeah, here's another one from Einar, which is the other way, because I like that polarity here, right? Which, on the other hand, we want to cast the architect as a dysfunctional, clueless ivory tower. That's projection, right? When you're in a conflict, you turn to stereotypical behavior, like, oh, ivory tower. If I hear the word ivory tower, there's already conflict going on there. And it allows developers to adopt a victim role. If only they would listen to me, but my hands are tied and all these stupid decisions are being made above my pay grade. It frees you from the actually having to enter the discussion and negotiation that is required to make your ideas count in a software organization. So for me, there's always two ways to deal with this. One, you leave the company, or two, you fight for the right.
You as
you turn into the victim, I think.
But
and that's pretty high. And just saying this is pretty easy for me to say, but not everyone is able to leave their job. So just so you know, I'm aware of that as well.
But it's also lots of other things I've seen, because I took the architect. I didn't take the architect route. I ended up on the architect route. But there's the kind of at ThoughtWorks we have, and at some Silicon Valley companies, right? We have principal engineer. So you're still hands-on. You're not supposed to have a leader. You might have a leadership role, but it's leading by example. And the expectation we at ThoughtWorks have of those people is they'll still be hands-on. They'll still be, shipping stories or doing things, but that they will pick the right story or the right way to implement it, which will have a kind of, 10x effect. So not a 10x developer, that's terrible, but you know what I mean? Like they'll pick the right thing that will have a real impact, like make it easy, get us to production, or something really important, not at an architectural level, but at the thingy level. So I think lots of developers who are like Einar describes, they don't know how to do that. Loads of people I see, they kind of, we're consultants, so we come in and ask people questions and stuff. They express this frustration, but they haven't gone on a journey to figure out what the one or two things they can do is. And one of the things that we come in and do is go, okay, if you change this thing and this thing, lots of stuff will suddenly, the negative reinforcement loop will become the positive reinforcement loop and all that kind of stuff, right? But it's hard to spot those things sometimes, especially if you're institutionalized, right? You're just stuck in the system, it, you've tried some stuff, it all failed.
So anyone has a different view or opinion? So in the last few minutes, there's a couple of people talking, including myself. Anyone has a different opinion? Like Einar, I like these different opinions. So anyone who wants to react on that?
I would probably not have a different opinion, but I have a question that I'm really curious about. What I observed in Sweden, in smaller to medium companies, there are no architects, but there are tech leads. So what would be the difference between a tech lead and an architect, in your opinion, or maybe in your experience, what you observed?
What they are doing. Who is thinking and working on the architecture? The tech leads,
yeah, of course, in context of architecture and technical decisions.
Who in your context, in your experience, who is taking the decisions regarding the architecture?
The team, right? This is the right way. So we are talking here about teams and some kind of decision making when team has autonomy, team has responsibility. Like in DDD community, it's quite common to be talking about microservices, ownership, right? So
what would be the reason that they project the role tech lead on someone instead of just developer? So what would be the trade-off there? I have my assumptions here, but what do other people think? So why would we make it explicit that someone is tech lead instead of just, I'm a developer in this team?
I see an architect as the bridge between the problem space and the solutions space. A tech lead sounds to me more solution space only.
Yeah.
So I assume that is someone in a role, maybe not explicitly, but yeah. So who makes the decision about transferring the decisions from the problem space to the solution space? Is that a tech lead, or is that an implicit architect role?
Can we make one more step in this conversation? And I would like to mention another thing that is popular in domain-driven design community, which is cross-functional teams. And I've been working in cross-functional teams in a number of companies, and I really like it. I've also been working in functional teams, like backend only, for example. And in a cross-functional team, a tech lead is a part of the team, right? So it's someone who is in the team working together. So the question, architect, do you see it different or not? Because when you mentioned that tech lead is kind of has nothing to do with problem, it's only solutions, I would disagree. Because cross-functional team works on a problem and a solution for a problem. So how does it work for an architect?
I think it depends on the size of the organization. So if you're talking, like Anton, you were mentioning before about small organization. So I don't know, if you have 50 people, probably the tech leads, or yeah, if you have a principal engineer, they do those things. But if you go to a bigger organization, maybe those roles are more clearly defined. So I think it's good in this discussion. I think it's good to put the context of the size of the organization.
Yeah, I agree. But how about some exceptions that we have in industry, like companies like Google? I never heard about architect in Google. Are they exist?
Yeah, so also a bit on team topology. Let's look at that book that's getting some traction a lot. There are 4 types of teams. So I haven't discussed this with them actually, but where would an architect fit in the team topologies?
Because they're not explicitly there, right, in the book.
No, and you could say, and I argued for it, that it can be the enabling team, but an enabling team has an end date.
Yeah,
Usual
right?
architects team don't have an end date. So they also talk, this is for the front end part, I know. So let's say you have a shared design system, you have a sort of virtual team that manages that. So this is an approach I usually took as well. So let's say you have 5 teams, and then each of the teams has a representative in the sort of architectural meeting every so weeks, right? So then you have people in the team that are expert as architecture. Doesn't mean someone else from the team doesn't do it. Be careful with that trap. And these can rotate as well, right? It's the same with, I think they're going into these some reliability engineering teams, right? Sometimes you have a team, sometimes it's a virtual one inside the teams. So
yeah, some of them call it reliability because they look at the reliability of the service, don't they, as opposed to the individual.
But really, I think it depends, and it can change over time, right? Sometimes you just maybe need for a couple of times that team or not. I think it really depends on context too. Yeah. I'm not sure. I could see both models work actually.
So where I was very recently, we had that meeting, but we invited everyone. So it was once a week, and it was like the most attended architecture meeting I've ever seen in my life. And we invited product, we invited UX, we invited the security person so that they could kind of sit there and send a distress flare whenever someone sounded like they were going to do something stupid. And there was no unified technical direction beyond we're building eventually an event-driven multi-tenant SaaS. That's kind of the direction they were headed off in. And so that worked, and we were taking cross-team decisions, but within people from teams. The one problem that my pair, who was the client, kind of ostensibly the client's chief architect, but they didn't, he and I avoided doing any chief architecture. The one question was, what happens when the CTO comes to me and asks me what the architecture is? And it had evolved in a unified direction, but we couldn't guarantee it. So we didn't have a document which we'd passed down to the teams which they were implementing or not. But we could pretend to the CTO we were implementing it. So that was absent. So we spent quite a lot of time managing up to make them understand. See what Chris says about this. Chris is the receiving end of this mindset. But we spent more time. We set the teams going. They got the hang of the autonomy. We then spent more time managing up to go, right, we understand this is how we will push your desires down. This is how we'll represent an enterprise architecture view, et cetera, So we'll meet your needs, but we will do it in a different way. We won't write a big document. We won't, we'll sense strategy and individually from teams and bring it up the chain as opposed to push it down and stuff. I'll shut up and see what Chris says now. This is a disaster. Never do this. It'll go wrong.
Yeah, I also see this as so the question I asked you, Anton, about the labeling of tech lead. What I usually see is this balance, right, between ownership and not ownership. So if there's no ownership, we try to label people with the ownership. But the dark side of labeling people with that ownership is the projection again. So if you go too far on that part, well, now you have command and control labeled people, right? Because it's given to them, by the way, because of the projection usually. So that's a tight balance. So if you take that away, then people question, okay, who's responsible for the decisions? Then they say, okay, we have a tech lead. This is a tech lead. Label the tech lead. Okay, now it's the tech lead is that, and it's like, oh, and now you turn the other way. So there's not really a good way. The only thing is to manage that polarity. It's like breathing in, breathing out, right? It's like I'm breathing in. Oh, okay, I'm getting too much oxygen inside and I need to let go, or letting go. And once you breathe out, oh, I need new oxygen. So it's the same with the labeling of that certain role. And I call it a role architecture of the ownership of it. Because the danger of not labeling is, okay, who owns it? The danger of labeling it is, okay, someone owns it and can take power over it. And I think that's the tight balance that an organization needs to deal with, is how do I balance that polarity between these two? And it's a managing situation, right? It's, I think Einar asked these questions, right? How do these evolve? What forces affects the evolution? I think same with team topology entering the game, right? Saying teams aren't static, it's a dynamic thing, and we need to treat them as something dynamic, and we need to have a feedback loop that constantly senses the system in order to maybe slightly nudge it in the correct way or change it in the correct way. Small changes. But yeah, that's complex. Hopefully I make sense in that explanation.
I think just something to share that what you just described, I think happens in lots of parts of our organization, where someone who is perceived as having certain status is supposed to deal with something. And I read it recently, on a book about leadership that I can't recall the name now, sorry. But yeah, about a CTO kind of asking the other C-level executives about their opinion on a strategy. And then I think the same situation can happen where maybe the other executives say, oh, well, yeah, this looks great, because they don't want to confront the CEO. But I think, then the person who is the person who is in power, they need to go and ask to their team, whomever that is, to say, this is what I believe is the way we should go. Please critique it, because I'm not happy with it. And just to invite people to criticize whatever we have come up with. I'm not sure if it makes sense.
Yeah,
I do. I've been in that situation where there was, I mean, someone from the business comes in, oh, we have this and this and this should happen, and so on. And then the whole group like looking at me. And the day I noticed that, I stopped talking. I said, well, no, I kept on talking. And I said, like, I have no clue how we're going to solve that. Do you have any idea, people? Please.
And that's awkward, the silence, or not?
That's the most awkward silence. So I said, no, I'm not taking the decision anymore. Please stop asking me. Stop looking at me. I can help. I can challenge it, but I'm not going to say how it should be done. And that meant that de facto, I had the role of making decision on an architectural level, on design level, on system level. And that was really annoying. So I made sure I didn't need it to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. Yeah.
I can give probably another example, like as a tech lead or as some architects, I think, had the same issue. Like when someone from C-level comes to you and says, we need to build a feature X, we just signed some partnership, for example. How much time will it take? And you need to answer, right? Have you ever been in such situation?
All the time.
Exactly.
The first trick is to answer, is not to answer a number, it's always to answer a range. Or to say this is complex, or this is not complex, or this we need to take into account, or we have no clue how that third party works, so we'll have a ramp up time just to understand how it works. We need some experiments first before we can have some rough idea of how it works. And then I remind those people about the cone of uncertainty. You know,
Yeah.
at the beginning of a project, you can make a projection. This is going to take so many times, but the error is 4 times minus 5 times. So I might be taking 4 more times, or half of 1/4 of the time. That's a kind of uncertainty at the beginning of a project. And if they don't believe you, you take the book and you show them. This is science. This is statistics, not science. This is statistics. Well, statistics is science. There's no way around it. So I'm saying so much, but this is how uncertain it is.
It's
that's another thing to put in the pros of architects, actually, is because again, Joe developer, like I've seen execs, not to throw arrows at Christopher, but some execs know they can, just by their presence, they can go and scare a developer into putting something at the top of a backlog, right? And having an architect to run interference on that and to kind of be able to speak their language and to give the stuff that Eve was talking about and kind of explain it like that, but also then to kind of go, oh, do we have the priorities changed? Is this a change in direction? All that kind of stuff. That's another thing that you can't expect every to have that. I didn't used to have those skills, and I'm only just learning them now. So
there's to go on that road. What you were saying as well, Eve. Dawn has this nice assumption mapping where she goes into that statistic. It's in the visual collaboration book that you can download from Leanpub, and she has this exactly what you said, the assumptions and mathematics inside there that proves right. Well, just read it. It's a really nice thing. Yeah.
But I think this is the moment where it became unfair. I saw some job advertising thing for expectation from an architect to give estimations for projects. And I just thought, are you insane? How can you hire me to give you a number about the work done by totally different people? What kind of wizard? I didn't talk about wizard, but my first and single thought was, how can you so stupid to rely on this? How accurate can this number be, and what is this number anyway? So how accurate can a third person talk about what a team does? We never, this is what most non-tech people don't understand, I think. We never repeat ourselves. To be a developer, it's the most creative work ever, because the situations are always different. You never repeat the same feature twice.
Alberto's
if you do,
right.
you are a monkey, and it's already automated. So the situations are always different. The code has evolved, the team has evolved or changed. So you cannot estimate things like this. One important person leaves. So why do it at all? Why not working towards a goal and making small steps and thinking about what I'm ready to invest in? So I invest 2 weeks in this project. I look how it works, and then I decide, instead of asking, are you done in 6 months and 2 weeks?
Yeah, I agree with the concept. I don't agree because for me, estimation is just that. It's an estimation. So it's just a rough estimate. If I go to a casino, I can estimate that I come back with money or not, right? But it's just that it's predicting the future. But what they usually want is giving a deadline or time, and that's a total different concept. So estimation are just bluntly being misused by people. And that's what I usually tell the teams now, right? Estimation is for you as a team if you want to use them to improve your work. If anyone outside the team ever negotiates you about estimation, come to me and I'll go to them.
It wasn't about the numbers. It is not about the estimation. It's about this permission. Does this
exactly?
And it's the same. It's the same mistake.
Yeah. Exactly.
I wanted to tell you that to answer your question, Kenny, you asked me like why someone is labeling people as a tech lead. Because I think business is just works this way. For them, it's easier to label someone an architect or a tech lead And then they can ask these estimations only from one person instead of waiting for endless meetings, endless discussions that take time. And, you know, because I've seen several times in my experience, they ask you estimation, they don't tell you why they ask it. And 3 months later, you find out you have a deadline. And then the deadline, because you told them that it will take that amount of time, but they never tell you about that.
It's like Adam Smith. You know, in the old days, one person would make, you know, a nail or something, right? So they'd forge the iron and they'd make the things and they'd hammer it out and shape it out. And then capitalism comes along and splits out all the different job roles so they can scale up and go faster. But we're still living with that, right? We're like, we need to have a dev lead and we need to have a lead and we need to have an architect. And can I just be the one person wearing different hats? Or can the whole team have those hats and we swap them around? But that's not how the mental models work currently of most people in organizations, right?
But there's something, there's another bit here about how remuneration works in companies and how structure kind of influences that as well. In that, you know, I think a lot of need for that structure comes from the fact that you get massive number of, you know, juniors, seniors, and so on, and then you promote out all your experienced people to exactly to those leads to attend meetings, to management positions, to non-technical positions. So I think a lot of companies have a problem like that because you can't split those roles across the team because team doesn't have the skill, and you don't have that skill because you promoted your experienced people out because you thought because the company felt like paying them as a programmer, you know, whatever the amount you need to pay for a person with 10, 15, 20 years of experience was just too much. So we can't pay that much to a programmer. We have to promote them to director of engineering.
That's very true. Actually, it's like, yeah, to stay up with the market.
With a team with no capacity, and then you need to have an architect, and the loop kind of just goes on and on and on. Yeah. And then you lose autonomy, so you have to teach people autonomy. And I think a lot of things kind of keep in a reinforcing cycle.
Yeah, just to stay up with the job market, right? We can't pay developers more, but if we promote all of our developers to senior developers,
I think this will change. I think we are already in the middle of a crisis where every company realized somehow that they need computers, and they could use some automated stuff, and they lose their market share because the world is digital. And this idea about code monkeys won't work out for long. It will work out for the next couple of years, but at some point, companies will realize that they need the brain of the people and not the fingers to type the same thing.
Christopher, you said something that rings a bell with me, right? We were talking about, or you said, this is where you benefit a ton from someone with power and influence who can protect against abusive estimation. People can say a lot about project manager, but one of my best projects I was in was with a project manager who used his power to protect me as a developer. And that was just the most amazing time as a developer I had, because the person went to me and said, what do you need? I said, well, this is what I need. Okay, I'll make the translation to the CEO and just let him shoot. And he did. And we managed on time. We managed before time that we even expected, but we never, he was just the correct gatekeeper, right? Yep. It's the Spider-Man. Yep. A lot of power gives you a lot of responsibility. So yeah. So there's always a good side there sometimes. Sometimes you need a person with power to protect. But there's always...
There's that superpower, and the other one, so if you get both, then you're going to be winning. The other one is not wanting to not hear about bad news. So the best project managers, who are called Mel, and that I've worked with, Mel, Andy, and Charlie, 3 best ever. They were amazing at that thing you've just described, and the other one was they wanted to hear about bad news as soon as possible. So therefore, if it is going to go, you can tell them today. They'll make you, make sure you don't just, raise the flag by accident. They're going to make sure that you've done it right, but then they'll work, they'll understand it, they'll work with you, and et cetera, et cetera. Because if they're not like that, then you'll not tell them the bad news, and it'll just, get worse and worse. But those are superpowers.
And this is this again, coming from deep democracy, they say you first need to own your rank, right? So I am that architect. I am in this position. I'm in the system, but then I get to share and play with that rank. It's what Yves said, right? They're projecting onto me these decisions, but I'm going to share it with the team.
Yeah, that's turning the ship around, right? That's the book about the guy who the American admiral or whatever he was who ran that nuclear submarine. Yeah. He pretty much wasn't running it, but he was ostensibly in control. Sorry, Christopher.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, that goes both ways, right? It especially for someone who is in that sort of middle position. It's not just about sharing the role and expertise with the team. It's also about educating in the other direction. So when you read books like Phoenix Project, for example, this is exactly what happens, right? Is that you have someone with the right level of influence who can educate upwards as well. And I think that's really, really valuable. We've heard a lot about dysfunctional C-level, and I think having somebody who can have a positive influence in that direction is super valuable.
Yeah. Like someone said earlier, actually, I can't remember, maybe it was Einar, it comes down to mental models. If their mental model understands that estimates are plus or minus, or that software, is better in thin slices and all that kind of stuff, then you're going to win. And the people who can identify current mental models and change mental models, that's the big thing. Then people get there, like, oh, you're not understanding, I keep explaining things, but you're hearing something different because how you think of software development is different from me. So let's address that first, which is why 4 key metrics is good, right? 4 key metrics is numbers. And then we're like, but to get this better, we're going to do things that seem strange, but blah, blah, blah. That's a game changer for me.
And I think it was Sin put it in alt, right? The architect elevator, making that translation, protecting from not doing that, but also managing above and give them possibilities. So we're closing the deadline of today. Deadline, estimations. Trying to get Christina. No, but I want to have 2 things for the people who are still here or listening. Is let's first talk about a developer perspective. So just one thing, what can you do differently tomorrow as a developer to battle if you're dealing with this ivory tower type of architect? What's the first step that you could do here?
It's not about the ivory tower. Generally, with your colleagues, with your team leads, it doesn't have to be an ivory tower. So how to...
But let's say you're in that system. Let's say you are dealing with an ivory tower architect. What would be one thing that you can start doing tomorrow differently?
I cannot answer this. It has to be somebody else because I won't be in. No, it won't happen.
So I heard it somewhere here. I think it was Einar. Take ownership of the problem yourself as a developer, I think.
Yep.
Right? It's easy to sit back and play the victim role, but I think if you start owning it and start taking responsibility, I think that's something you could do. But yeah, I haven't been in that position for a while yet, but that's what I did back then. Now the other way around. So if you're an architect, you feel you're being projected into the ivory tower. So someone says, hey, ivory tower architect to you, what's something you could start doing tomorrow? I've heard a lot of these already, but what's the most pivotal thing you can start doing tomorrow?
David's was good. Ask questions. So I sound like a lean idiot, but they should. If I was the architect, or if I was the developer, I would ask the architect or the senior person to come and pair with me for a day. And if I was the senior person, I would go and pair with that person for a day, or watch them mob and sit and shut up as well. Just listen. So there's a thing in lean called go to the Gemba, which is, so I sound like a lean idiot, but basically, and I think in the Toyota book, which is also behind me, there's a circle on some of the Toyota floors and where it's like senior execs go and stand and they just watch. and you can learn tons, because I guarantee in almost all circumstances, because people don't try and do, become an ivory tower person on purpose. They'll just have a very different idea of what happens from what's actually happening. And I think if they go and listen and watch, I have, and the best of two of the three people I just mentioned on my project manager awesomeness hit list, two of them would just sit there for 2 or 3 weeks and just listen. Because you can hear development working or not working. Although it's different now. We're on Mural, not Mural. We're on Zoom. What's Christina Wren?
I replaced the Miro with that one post-it. This is post-it. Anyway, it's in German. On my monitor here, explain instead of expect. So instead of expect something and be angry if it doesn't happen, just explain what is in your mind. And this is so my motto, put on the monitor, to not forget and do not have too much expectation, too high cognitive load projected on anybody else.
So for me, it's
just like listening and
helping
with itself.
For me, it's either if you're a coder or an architect or a human being, always take responsibility first. Start from there. And if someone calls you an ivory tower architect, which I've probably been called or someone said it, let's take ownership on that. At least someone is thinking it, so it must be true in a way.
You mean challenging and making it, tearing down the tower?
Then it's listening, right? Why do you believe I'm a, and then accepting that it is what they perceive you to be. Listening. Okay, time to wrap up. Thank you everyone for your input, and thanks everyone who wasn't here but gave input anyway through Miro board, through YouTube, through Zoom. And in 2 weeks, I think we have another meetup again with Ben, continuing our Wortley mapping collaboration. So it will be up this week, and see if we can get another collaborative modeling session going on there. So I hope to see you there. And thanks everyone for your input. And we're going to close the live stream. And well, we're going to do what every meetup usually do, is the after talk.